Last week, I promised that we would take a deep dive into the issue of who deserves help and why we should help those overseas, despite the fact there are people suffering all around us. And I did heads up you that we were going to talk about PWS&D. So despite this cold, icy, promised blizzard that hasn't happened, kind of a day, we're going to talk about those things. So we're going to start off with a story. An estimated 28.3 million Afghans, so 2/3 of the population of Afghanistan, need humanitarian assistance. The crisis is being driven by 3 consecutive years of drought, crippling economic decline since 2021, and of course, decades of conflict, coupled with recurrent natural disasters. Afghanistan has some of the highest levels of food insecurity in the world, and 15.8 million people are projected to be food insecure this year. In the Kushkak village in Afghanistan, 42-year-old Guljan lived a simple life with her husband and their 4 children, including her daughter-in-law. In recent years, though, her husband grappled with debilitating leg pain, rendering him unable to work and placing the burden of financial support on Guljan and her sons. Despite facing economic hardships and managing household responsibilities, Guljan displayed unwavering determination to provide for her family. On what seemed to be a typical day in October 2023, she was away from home seeking medical attention from her 6-year-old daughter when she heard news about an earthquake striking her home district. Hurrying back to her village, she encountered a sight of complete devastation. The once familiar landscape was transformed into debris. Heartbreakingly, the earthquake had claimed the lives of her husband and her 11-year-old son, both trapped inside the house during the disaster. So after her husband's passing, Guljan had to assume the role of decision-maker for her family, taking on his responsibilities as well as hers. Now a female-headed household, she encountered significant challenges in obtaining assistance. Observing the disparity in opportunities, she noted that the restrictions placed on women in Afghanistan exacerbate their difficulties in doing things like participating in assessments compared to their male counterparts in the community. However, after being identified by PWS&D's local partner as a potential project participant, Guljan's family received a winterized tent to help them endure the harsh weather conditions. In a timely intervention, they came to our aid, providing my family with a new tent, which we promptly set up, she shares. With a new grandchild on the way, Guljan is concerned about how the baby and the rest of the family will be able to find shelter and food to survive. PWS&D is implementing a $1 million food assistance project in Bimian province, assisting over 4,000 of the most marginalized households. Families will receive monthly cash assistance over a 3-month period, enabling them to buy essential food items. The support of Canadian Presbyterians has made a life-altering difference for Guljan's family. We could probably argue for days about what makes Guljan deserving our help or not deserving of our help. We could talk about complex Middle Eastern politics, government policies on aid, the impact of the pullout of the United States in 2021, and the subsequent Taliban takeover. We could talk about religion. We could talk about fundamentalism. And at the end of the day, though, does any of that really matter to Guljan, struggling to find shelter and food for her family in the most trying times? Probably not. So point 1 of today, God created each and every one of us equal, and no one is more or less deserving of assistance or the basic necessities of life. So what is this Presbyterian World Service and Development? I haven't talked about it in quite a while, but simply put, PWS&D is our church's way of responding to the ongoing needs around our world. We respond together as the church. We're inspired by God's promise of abundant life. And PWS&D envisions a sustainable, compassionate, and just world for all. PWS&D, though, is not the only mission agency of our church. We often talk about our church having one mission and two funds. So as I share some of the things our church is doing around the world, it's important to remember there's also a lot of work happening here in Canada, as well as right here in Winnipeg. It's just coming from a different fund, which is Presbyterian's sharing. Our church, in fact, contributes a not insignificant portion of our budget to Presbyterian's sharing every year in order to support work that's happening in our own country. Which brings me to my second point. It is possible and beneficial to do more than one thing at once. We are not limited in who we can help. Engaging in international development work does not mean that we are forgetting about our neighbors here in Canada or elevating overseas work above work here at home. This has definitely, though, been a trap that Christians can fall into. I think we can all think of examples of churches doing mission work in countries while actively fighting against allowing people from that very same country into their own. And of course, we can think of churches choosing to feed the hungry in Africa while advocating directly for policies that prevent feeding their homeless in their own cities. I'm proud to be a part of a church that does not do that. And next, I want to tell you about a place called Mulanje Mission Hospital in Malawi. It's a place I visited with Conrad and Kella and Matt in 2012, and I was there again in 2019. Mulanje Mission Hospital is in southern Malawi, near the border with Mozambique, and it sits on the bottom of a beautiful mountain. The hospital, along with one small government hospital, serves a rural population almost as large as the city of Winnipeg. They provide healthcare and public outreach to the area and a safe place for women to give birth to their children. And one of the programs that has really stuck with me, which I learned about on my last visit, is their infant formula program for caregivers. Because in Canada, we can say fed is best and give parents support to choose the absolute best way to feed their child that makes the most sense to their family. But in rural Malawi, things really aren't that easy. When a mother is unable to breastfeed for any reason, or another caregiver is responsible for the child, whether it's through maternal death or something else, it's not nearly as simple as just going to Walmart or Costco and grabbing some formula. For starters, there's no Walmart, but there's also no running water in most people's homes. And due to recent cyclones and other flooding, finding clean water is even more challenging than it's been in the past. The program admits caregivers and children to an on-site house, provides formula, bottles, and a clean pot, and that becomes relevant later. And then it takes time and care to ensure the adults know exactly how to measure and prepare formula. There's very low literacy rates, so it's not the same as just picking it up and reading it. But more importantly, perhaps, how to sterilize the water and the bottles over a fire using that clean pot. Before they're discharged from the program, the babies need to be gaining weight correctly and not show any signs of malnutrition. It's an amazing program that's making a big difference in the lives of some of the most vulnerable children in the world. So why help at Malawi, or at Mulanje, or Malawi? Why does PWS&D support this hospital in this tiny African country? And the answer is maybe a bit simplistic, but it's at its most basic. It's because they asked for our help. So my third point of this morning, the church has a responsibility to help where they are welcomed and invited, and not to push our way into places where we are not wanted. Both Jesus and Paul talk about this in their own ways. And the church, as we know, has done some terrible things in the name of helping and the name of Christ. Not just in recent history, dating back for centuries and continuing to this day. Perhaps most familiar to us, of course, is residential schools, when the Presbyterian Church pushed not just Christ, but also the ideas of white supremacy onto children, separating them from their families and trying to train the Indian out of the child. When I think about our city and the great need, I'm reminded that there are many groups of people, although certainly not all, who've been hurt by the church and want nothing to do with it. It's not appropriate for the church to swoop in and start programs that it deems wanted or needed and force them onto people, here or anywhere in this world. Our church values active partnership and relationship. In order to know how best to help, we need to dig in and really listen to people and build relationship. Not a relationship of superiority, but equality. As our church works to build relationships here in this community and listen to what the needs of our area are, know that church staff at our head office are actively listening to our partners around the world, serving where wanted and asked, and leaving when no longer welcome or needed. It's the best thing ever for a community to grow out of the need for assistance. And finally, I want to share how PWS&D is responding to the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Palestine. As the world watches, the church is acting. PWS&D wrote this on February 21st, so about 10 days ago. After over 4 months of war in Gaza, tens of thousands have been killed or injured, and more than 500,000 people face catastrophic hunger. The most recent conflict in Rafah, where over 1 million people have sought refuge, has only complicated an already dire situation. Humanitarian efforts remain challenged by limited access and mobility, as well as the high cost of goods and the difficulty of getting them into Gaza. Action by Churches Together is an alliance of churches across the globe that work together to respond to disasters. The Presbyterian Church is a member of this alliance. ACT continues to coordinate efforts to alleviate suffering on whatever fronts are possible. So PWS&D is providing funds through ACT to an ACT Alliance member. So it's lots of words here, but the Department of Service to Palestinian Refugees of the Middle East Council of Churches. So basically our church is working with churches that are on the ground there, Middle Eastern churches who already had programs to serve in Palestine. And so the generosity of Presbyterians is enabling the ongoing work. To date, what they're providing is primary health and dental care in their Rafah clinic. They're distributing things such as essential medicine, hygiene, and dignity kits, and trying to provide mother and child health supports. They've been able to give cash transfers to 620 families to buy water, food, and other essentials. They've also provided essential food support to more than 800 people who are currently taking refuge in churches in Gaza. And they're providing psychosocial care to children and mothers. So through play-based and creative activities, mental health staff and volunteers are trying to help provide some psychological relief and give some normalcy and hope for children. Parents are also getting training in how to support themselves and their children during this time of really, really intense stress. But of course, ongoing conflict makes these activities incredibly dangerous and challenging to do. But the church there continues to do all they can. And that brings me to my final point. Each of us, each individual, each family, each congregation, each church can only do so much. While here in this room, we're each so richly blessed, there's a limit to how much each of us can give. For example, if I was to sell everything I owned and give it to the poor, as Jesus once commanded a rich man, would I have even begun to make a dent in global poverty? Likely not. As humans, the fact is we have limited time. There's only 24 hours in a day. Limited energy. We do apparently need to sleep. And most of us have limited money. I mean, Jeff Bezos, we can argue, has infinite money, but most of us, limited money. And so as we listen to God's calling to live generously, we have to make difficult choices. I often talk about how it's easy to get overwhelmed by the suffering in the world. It's much easier and much more comfortable to close our eyes to it. I also talk, though, about how when we open them, we're able to see little bits of hope, God's work and grace active around us. By focusing on less things, we're often able to do more. And so our church responds with targeted projects, both here and around the world. We don't work in every country or every region, but rather we work where invited and where we have the resources to do something good. I have a lot more that I could say, because of course we haven't even begun to talk about income inequality, the differences and challenges that come with relief and development, the church's role in advocacy against unjust systems, or how we address ongoing needs here at home when things seem to be getting worse instead of better. So what I want to leave you with this morning is this. We are a part of a church that is doing something bigger than any of us can do on our own. God has created each and every one of us in his image, and all humans are equally deserving of assistance, help, and support when it's needed, regardless of where they live or what has happened in their pasts. We don't need to decide between helping those near to us and those across the world, because it is possible to do both things. The church works where it's welcome and invited. We have confessed a past in which this was not the case. We work hard to ensure that our current work does not harm those who are receiving support, does not elevate one group above another, and does not contribute to systemic discrimination. And lastly, while our world can seem overwhelming, know that we are not in it alone. While each of us has finite resources, and Prairie or the Presbyterian Church in Canada can only do so much, groups around our world are all responding to the needs of others. None of us are solely responsible for this work. And so we go forward, knowing that we are part of the ongoing solution to suffering in our world. Amen.